All right, we are live on YouTube and we are live on Zoom.
Woo!
Hey everyone.
Hola.
Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon.
I think we should alternate on norms.
Okay.
Is that cool?
Yeah. I was also thinking about them because this is a webinar. So what do they mean?
While you're at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll do the first. We'll just alternate. Hey Amber. Welcome.
Yay, Amber.
Where's Turlock? Do some Google foo.
It's on the way to Tahoe.
Yeah.
It's in the Central Valley. It's near where I grew up.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in Patterson, Amber, right next to you.
Nice. Welcome.
Danielle from Montreal.
Hey Danielle.
Wait,
Montreal.
Montreal, Canada? Wow. Hayward, Upland. All right, SoCal. Tammy.
Oh, hey Tammy. Hey Amber.
Hey.
Good
Dope.
to see you again.
Daisy. Hey, I know some people. This is great.
Hey Michelle.
Watch, it's going to be all our people. And it's like,
Eric's mom. Family members.
my brother's on here, you know. Oh, Tiara!
Yeah.
Ooh, Rockland. You know what? Rockland has a really good skating rink. I'm down with Rockland. And a bowling alley. So, I'm cool with Rockland.
There was a really good skating documentary on HBO a while ago about skating rinks all around the country.
Oh, I saw that it's on there and I added it to my queue, but I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah.
Because they also just added all these Batman stuff. So I've been watching a lot of cartoons.
You gotta prioritize.
I do.
Hey, Lisa.
Regala. Elena Arañaga.
Happy Friday. I forgot today's Friday.
I didn't.
Hey, Marcos.
Distance teaching, it's just daytime, nighttime for me. It's
Yeah.
like those are the days of the week.
Mhm.
It's,
Diamond Bar.
Oh,
Physics teacher in here.
all
hey.
right. Physics. Tech Bridge.
Oakland.
Woo-woo. This is excellent. Leah Graniella.
Aaron, I'd say whenever you want to kick us off, go for it.
Okay, let's go for it. So I'd love to introduce Eric and Desiree. Eric Cross is a 7th grade science teacher at Albert Einstein Academy Middle School, adjunct professor at University of San Diego, science tech interdisciplinary and IB. Is that International Baccalaureate?
It is.
And to back up, my name is Erin Scullion-Jones. I work for SJSU, adjunct faculty, former middle school teacher, still very passionate about middle school. Super excited to welcome Eric and Desiree, who is the senior physics educator at the Exploratorium Teacher Institute and a contributor to the URC Underrepresentation Curriculum project. Is that true?
No, actually, I did not
Sorry about that.
contribute. It's okay. I did not contribute, but I am a huge fan and I am in communication with the folks who make it.
Awesome. Senior science educator and staff physicist, and we'll be discussing decolonizing STEM with anti-bias and anti-racist themes, which feels extremely timely and important. So welcome to all, and this will be recorded. So if you are not participating live today, you will absolutely be able to participate via your screens at home later. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Both Desiree and I will be moderating and helping with that. And yeah, here's a few announcements. Brian, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so as Aaron said, we'll have a recording of this presentation today available on our K-12 Online Teaching Academy webpage. So I dropped the link in the chat, and we'll send out a follow-up email to all of you after this as well with all the links that you need. There are captions available in this live presentation today if you select the captioning option in the bottom of your Zoom window, and there'll be captions available in the recording. Those of you who are attending, your video and audio is not turned on, so you don't have to worry about being visible in the recording or us hearing you or anything like that. But please use the chat to communicate with one another, ask questions of our panelists. Just make sure you select all panelists and attendees instead of all panelists when you're submitting that to the chat, just so everyone can see what you're contributing. And lastly, if you want to keep the conversation going, you can feel free to join our Facebook group or our LinkedIn group. You can see the links there on the slide, and I'll drop them in the chat so you can go ahead and get connected to one another. I think that's it. So I'll go ahead and stop my screen share so we can pass it off to Eric and Desiree.
Nice. Thanks, Brian. Teachers, welcome. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And those of you who are watching online, viewing asynchronously, thanks for watching the presentation. And Desiree, I'm excited.
Me too.
I'm working on this for a while. Yeah. I'm going to go and share my screen so that we can get started. My name is Eric Cross. I'm a science teacher down here in San Diego, California. I teach an amazing group of middle schoolers. I have about 236 per class at Ivy Middle School just outside downtown. I love what I do, and I'm fortunate to be able to talk today about something I'm very passionate about. All the resources and everything that we're covering, we've provided in a one sheet at the bit.ly link, bit.ly/decolonize STEM. It's all lowercase. It is case sensitive. We ask that you maybe view it after the presentation. That way we don't become like our own students and look at the slides as we're going through it. But everything that we covered today and all the resources will be there, so you can have those a little bit later. But first off, Desiree, you want to lead us through this?
Yeah, so, being about decolonizing STEM, one thing that we like to think about is, connecting ourselves to where we are when we are there. And, I'm personally in Oakland, which is actually Chochenyo Ohlone land. And I just want to appreciate that those people are the people whose land I am on, right? This belongs to them, not to me. I'm renting a house on their land, and that's dope, but I want to appreciate that they were here before me and acknowledge that. I'm curious, if you know whose land you're on, can you pop it into the chat for us? And if you don't, it's totally understandable. There's actually a link on this slide. If you go to native-land.ca, you can actually type in your zip code, and it'll show you who the indigenous people are whose land you are actually occupying. And of course, Eric is in San Diego.
I am. And I am on Kumeyaay land here in San Diego. Kumeyaay make up most of kind of northern Mexico, just across the border, and then up towards the Temecula area. And then there's different bands of native indigenous people tribes from there. And this is something, Desiree, that you actually introduced to me through TI. And I know one of the things that I got out of this and doing this, and I started implementing it with my students, is it really frames our teaching and our classroom and our culture and what we value. I find we start off in this kind of context of not revisionist history, but what's really going on in the world, not a version of it, but hey, let's look at the timeline and realize that we are this kind of thin layer in between these dates. And at one point in time, there were people who lived here, and for a lot longer than we've been here, I find. And so I think one thing it's done is given me a humility, but it also kind of, I think, sets a culture and sets a tone for what I value as an educator.
Yeah. And it gives you this connection to where we are, and it helps your students to understand what that connection is. And I would also encourage you all, so Eric and I both included links to websites where you can learn more about the people whose land we're on. And so, for instance, in Oakland, on Chochenyo Ohlone land, there is this Sogoreate land trust. And so you can actually pay your Shumi tax You can pay your taxes for living on this borrowed land. So yeah, thank you for that and allowing us to have that space to do that. So now, as Eric mentioned, you know, my name is Desiree Whitmore, and I teach at the Exploratorium. We have a department called the Teacher Institute, or TI for short. You might hear Eric refer to us as TI. And so if you've never heard of TI, we are actually an organization, or rather a department in the museum, who really focuses on professional development for science teachers. And so our goal is to really help you through navigating anything that you need us to help you navigate through, right? We help you through science standards. We help you think about equity. We help you think about inquiry. We help you think about curiosity and what it means to be a good science teacher in a way that you feel the most supported, and that you're supporting your students in the best way. One of the ways that we do that is we use norms, right? And many of you may have norms in your classrooms that you use. For today's workshop, we're going to be talking about decolonizing STEM, which might come, you know, some topics in there might be a little difficult to discuss. You might think about, we're talking about race. We're talking about representation. We're talking about like how you see yourself versus how others see you. And so these norms that we are going to discuss with you right now are kind of along those lines. You might use a different set of norms for different days in your classroom. So the first norm here is step up, step back, which is really about like know yourself and balance your listening and talking. If you're someone like me or Eric, we like to talk. So I will just talk all day if you let me, right? And so I need to work on stepping back so that others can actually come up and let their voices be heard.
Yeah, to come behind you, Desiree, I think this is also looking at this from the teacher perspective. It's really important for us to also have these norms in our science classroom. And we don't always think of it this way because we're, you know, our STEM classrooms, in our math classrooms, we kind of, these hard sciences, analytical, right? But we would need to be able to be more than our content, and creating a place where our students can share and have these discussions is really important. And as teachers, we need to be thermostats and not thermometers. We need to be the ones who control the temperature and set the culture of the room. And by establishing these norms, it kind of puts everybody on the same page for us to build a community from. And so the next one is speak honestly and personally. So remember, what's true for you depends on you, and it might be different for someone else.
Mm-hmm. And following that is really, you know, what is true for you is not true for other people. And so think about the fact that you have to respect others. And so your intentions may not be the same as your impact. And so if you do happen to disrupt someone else's day, you know, own that, right? Like have these open and honest conversations, and always be thinking about the things that you're saying and the things that you're doing with respect to where everyone else is at in the room.
Yeah, the next one is we must make sure everyone feels safe, but safe isn't the same as comfortable. And I think it's really important that we delineate between those two things, because in these conversations, we get pushed outside of our comfort zone, and everyone has a different kind of threshold as to where that is. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're unsafe because you're outside your comfort zone. It just means you're just uncomfortable. So that knowing the difference. So we want to make sure that people are protected and feel safe, but also it's okay to feel uncomfortable and kind of be in that space.
Yeah, because generally we are wired to flee discomfort, right? We don't want to have these difficult conversations. We want to run away, or we want to just shut down and not discuss them at all. But it's important because we actually learn through discomfort, right? Like once you're in that uncomfortable place, you can actually move forward, right? It can be very powerful. So we encourage you to take risks and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Own your impact.
And the next one I feel like resonates with the 7th grade teacher in me is you don't have to play, but you aren't allowed to damage the game. And when I don't know how many times teachers you've been in the classroom, you've been having this deep conversation, or it's really engaging, and someone raises their hand and you think they're going to participate. Can I go to the bathroom? Or they use it to make a joke, or maybe tear someone down because sometimes students get uncomfortable or for other reasons. And establishing this norm in the very beginning kind of sets the tone of, hey, okay, this is what we do. So I think calling it out in advance, now we're being proactive as opposed to reactive. But again, that's when that really resonates with me as a middle school teacher. Love my kids, but they're 7th graders.
Yep. And then we've got anonymity, right? So some of the things that we're going to be discussing here are going to be very personal. And even in the chat, we're going to be asking you to be interactive and interact with us in the chat. And we'd like to ask you to kind of think about not who's saying what, but what you can learn from what's being said, right? And so we'd like to, if you are going to share something that you learned here, you know, don't share the person who said it, but rather share what you learned from it, right? It's not about the minute details. It's really about what can you learn from what we're discussing here.
Yeah, and last kind of wraps it up is that we're all in this together. And again, as we emphasize the fact that it's the we over the I, we are going to go to certain places, but it's going to be safe. We're going to go there together on this journey. And we call these things out. What we do is we lower the stress level for our students. We make a safer place for our students where they feel included. And what happens when you do those things as an educator? You provide an environment where deeper learning could happen. We know that there's a direct relationship between stress and learning. And when we can lower those things for students, it opens the playing field for them to be able to engage, to learn, to engage in deeper conversations, honest conversations, and kind of venture into some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. So with that, I want to start us off, and Desiree lead us in a warm-up activity.
Yes. So in the Teacher Institute, we do a lot of focusing on hands-on or interactive things that we can do in our classroom with our students. And we've actually struggled a lot with thinking about how can we do all of this virtually. So this is an activity. This is a science activity, I promise. And it is very closely related to what we're going to be talking about today. You might not think so in the beginning, but just bear with me, okay? So here on the screen, now one pro tip also, we're all on Zoom, right? I don't know if you can adjust your Zoom in webinar format or if you even see us at all, but if you can like, there's a bar that separates the speakers from the screen, and you can move that bar all the way over to the right to make us tiny and make your screen as big as possible. That will really help you in this activity. So you see a cross and you see a dot. Okay, what I want you to do is on the bottom, it says left eye closed. So I'd like you to close your left eye. You can either do that with your hand or just, if you can, just close it. Okay, and then I want you to look at the cross and I want you to move your face closer to and farther from your screen. And then I want you to type in the chat what you notice when that happens. Okay, so close your eye and move back and forth and just type in anything that you notice that's happening while you're doing it.
By the way, this is awesome when your students have their videos on and you're doing it with them.
Yeah.
And everything looks like Desiree right now.
Yeah, it's super fun. I like to take screenshots. I'm really bummed that I can't right now. You guys are hidden from me. All right, Danielle's dot disappears, the dot disappears, the dot disappears as I get closer. Okay, so the dot is vanishing. That's interesting. Okay, nothing happens when I move, but the dot disappears when I don't move. Ooh.
Kate said it, bright eye refocuses on the dot.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So what if, okay, the dot disappears. Okay, so you have a distance. You notice it disappears at a certain place.
Tammy has measurements in there.
Yeah, look at that. There's people that have rulers and stuff.
Masons, yeah.
Oh, look, 43 centimeters.
Albert's going metric.
Okay, I like it. Okay, not much is happening. Okay, well, what if, when my kid does it, he looks silly. That's great. What if we go to the next slide, because it's not working for some folks. What about now? What if you do the opposite? What if you close your right eye and you look at the cross with your left eye and do the same thing, move closer and farther away. Now, whoever, who is it, said it wasn't working? Rita. I don't know how big your monitor is or how close you are to it, but some people were saying if they're between 6 or 12 or 18 inches from the screen, that seemed to work for them. So if you could get closer, or maybe you have to be farther, that might help you. Or if you turn up your brightness, that might help as well. Okay, we see the sun is disappearing. It's super big. Okay. Oh, yeah. So you're maybe super close. Can you maybe like make your screen, like don't maximize it so that this whole thing is maybe only, 14 inches. That might help you a little bit. The dot disappeared, but the sun doesn't for me. Okay. Okay, so some people are seeing that the sun is disappearing. What? How can you make the sun? So when you say the sun disappears, like, is there just like a white spot there then? Like what happens exactly when the sun disappears? Like, what does disappear mean? Does it turn black? Like what do you see instead of the sun? Your brain fills in the blank. It matches the sky in the background.
Just see orange.
Just see orange.
All I see is sky.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? So before we just had this dot that disappeared with our one eye, and now we go to the other side and we're seeing that the sun is disappearing, even though the background is variable, right? Like this background is not just a plain orange background. You can see texture, you can see the sky, and somehow that whole thing is being filled in. That's kind of trippy, right? So what if we try one more? We're going to go back to our left eye now. So we're going to close our left eye and we're going to look at the cross and move closer and farther away. And what happens? Trippy.
I think that sums it up really well. Trippy.
Yeah, trippy is a good answer. Right, so the dot disappears again. So what does it mean when the dot disappears this time? Like, what do you see there instead of a dot?
Leah went up to it with very trippy.
Very trippy, yes, right? Absolutely nothing happens. Okay.
Nothing's happening for Joyce.
I'm sorry, Joyce. The asterisk is still there, right? So now the spikes are competing for your attention. Oh, don't cheat. You see a vertical line, okay? So where the dot was, you now see black, right? So somehow our brain is like connecting these lines that weren't connected before, right? Does anybody know what this is called, this phenomenon that we're experiencing and playing with right now? And if not, that's totally fine. Okay, we might not know. That's awesome. So my questions then for you are, these are questions that the Teacher Institute likes to ask. One of the reasons we like to ask is because this is kind of a way to get everybody on the same page. There are no wrong answers here, right? This is really low stakes. It's like, hey, what did you notice? Which you notice, you may notice, I asked you this many times over the last few slides. And the next question we ask you is, what do you wonder, right? So what are some of the things that you wonder, given that these things are disappearing? It's implicit bias. So you have a bias against orange suns?
And asterisks.
And asterisks.
Possibly.
I don't like those asterisks. You know what?
They
I
compete.
try to like them, but they're not that cool.
Not a fan.
Right? So like, yeah, so what do you actually, are you wondering if it's implicit bias that's making this happen? And then another question that we ask is, what do you want to try? So if you allow your students to step up and actually lead the investigation, they are more invested in doing the work, right? This is one of the ways to think about like making a more equitable classroom where you're not leading it alone. You're still leading it, right? But you're allowing your students to feel like they have more agency. They're allowed to ask the questions and be like, oh, I really want to try this thing. And it's like, okay, let's try that thing, because that thing's actually going to get us at the answer that I want us to figure out. Now, at the bottom of this slide, you'll see that there's a little link that says blind spot trials. And as Eric mentioned earlier, you're going to have access to these slides after this talk. That is going to send you to a folder that has a bunch of stuff that we tried. So it's like a bunch of slides, and you can move things around and change them and, you know, make copies into your own Google Drive. And so you can try out a whole bunch of different things. And you notice I use the term blind spot here. So that's exactly what this is. What we just experienced was a blind spot. Everyone has one. Some of you didn't experience it, and I'm really sorry about that. It has to do with the distance that you are to your screen and the size of your screen. But what's happening is that, you know, you have at the back of your eyeball, you have an optic nerve, And that optic nerve has to be somewhere on your retina, and that we can't actually see what all the light that hits that spot, right? That is called a blind spot. And everyone has one, and you just found it, right? You found the distance of where your blind spot is. Now, the fact that everyone has a blind spot and it's physically there always and always has been, like from the time you were born, even before you were born, to the time that you die, you have this blind spot in your eye, and your brain somehow works around it. Your brain makes up the difference. Your brain doesn't even let you know that it's there. You don't notice it unless something jars you into noticing it, like I just did. I forced you to pay attention to it. But we don't always pay attention to it, right? And so what we're going to be talking about today is finding those connections of things that we don't always notice, right? We have blind spots that are not just physical, but we have actually emotional and mental blind spots. And so that's a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, Desiree. And physical blind spots, as you said, they're innate. They're in us. We're born with them. But social blind spots we develop through experiences. And so with physical blind spots, you don't have any light detecting cells in that area of your eye where your optic nerve is connecting. And so what your brain does is it constructs a reality based on surrounding information. It tries to fill in the blanks. So basically what it does is just fill in the gaps. And our brains do the same thing with social blind spots. We build stories around facts to fill in the gaps. But in those circumstances, the stories our brains create don't often match with what's really happening. So if our experiences with different groups, different environments, or different cultures is very limited, we have a blind spot in that area. And just like what our brains did in this activity with Desiree, our brains will build stories around facts. And we've done this all the time. We do this when we're in a relationship with somebody and you're in a great heated text message and they respond with, okay. Your brain starts building stories around facts. You see one letter, but all of a sudden you've already constructed a reality based on one letter, right? And so we don't like ambiguity, neither does our brain. So it creates those stories. And so this quote by John Dewey really resonated. It says, all learning begins when our comfortable ideas turn out to be inadequate. And so we want to start moving into some ideas that may not be the most comfortable, but are really important to talk about. And I want to start off with a tried and true activity that many science teachers have done. But towards the end, we're going to kind of remix it a little bit. And that's the Draw a Scientist activity. And so what you do in this activity, if you're not familiar with it, is you'll ask students questions. What does a scientist look like? What do scientists do? And what are characteristics that make a scientist a scientist? And I usually start off the school year with this activity. Give students a piece of paper, let them draw, create, and then we'll collect and we'll start analyzing what they draw. And what they draw typically looks like these examples here. Now, these are from Edutopia, but these are pretty similar to what I see with my students and when we collect all of these. And we usually do this in the very first week of school. So here you see a variety of scientists, and just take a look at this for a second because there's a couple questions I want to ask. So I want you to give maybe a few more seconds to look at these pictures, and then we'd like you to answer some of these questions in the chat. So go ahead and make some observations, what you notice. And then in the chat, what do those scientists have in common? And is there anything missing from those representations of the scientists? And I'll go back to it. So what do these scientists have in common? And is there anything missing from these representations? What do you see? And just let us know in the chat. Eva says we're innate storytellers. We tell ourselves stories, even if they're not true. Yes.
Okay, so Tammy says they're all male. There's no females. They're all wearing lab coats. These dudes have crazy hair. Teacher talk and no student talk. White men, but they're missing the rest of us. Yep. They're all indoors. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of white dudes is basically what's happening, right? So this is interesting, right? Because this is real data, right? This is real drawings that students really made. And this is unfortunately the majority of what we see students drawing. And so the question that we have then is that real? Like, are there really only white male scientists who all work indoors and all wear lab coats? Like, is that really what's going on in the world? And so the question we want to ask is like, how could we prove that to ourselves, right? What kind of data, I want you to write into the chat, what kind of data do you think we would need to determine if all scientists are white? How could we figure that out? Just give me a couple ideas in the chat.
What a great way to start off too with, we're doing actual data collection. And for those of you who haven't done this before, we have a link to the resources in the document, and there's a tally sheet that you can use and have your students go around and collect data on perceived ethnicity, perceived gender, what's in the background, all of those things. And then if you're a math teacher, or if you want to have them convert their data into visuals, you can have them graph. And so you're hitting not just these really important conversations, but also some NGSS standards in that too, with being able to collect and represent data visually.
Yeah. Okay, so we have go visit a lab or do a survey. We have survey all scientists, check out associations of scientists. This is a really great question. How do you even define a scientist, right? This is a really great activity that we can do. You can look at photos. We have someone who says their lab was 80% women and 50% minorities. That's awesome. So you know that it's not true, okay? So now the question is, so looking at demographic data, right? So yeah, what if we look at demographic data, right? What if we say, hey, I know how many people are in the United States population. We have census data, right? We know what the demographics are of our country. What if we look at that and then we try to predict who we think is doing science? Okay, so let's try to do that for a moment. So we're gonna now do this activity where we're gonna look at this data. This is real data from 2014. Okay, this is what the US population looked like. This is a pie chart. So you have about 67% of the US population is white, and about 5% was Asian, 14% was Hispanic or Latino, 12% was Black, 1% reported as multiracial, and then you had about 1% American Indian / Alaskan Native, and less than 1% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, okay? So look at this data and think about it, okay? What we're going to do, you see at the top, it says who does, and then in brackets, it says engineering, biology, chemistry, physics. Now, again, you're gonna have access to these slides. Each of those things, each of those words, I want you to choose one of those fields, and you can do this in your head, or you can just type it into the chat. Which one is your field, right? Each of these links up here, each of these words is a link. And so when you have access to these slides later, you can see data of like exactly how many or how this demographic maps into each of these fields, okay? But now we're gonna do an activity before looking at the data. We're gonna try to predict it, okay, based on this. So here is a pie chart, and this pie chart is adjustable. So I'm gonna talk and Eric is going to listen to your percentage queries and he's going to adjust it, okay? So we're gonna say, first off, given this data, how many Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, like what percentage do you think of that demographic makes up scientists? Let's pick a science, actually, let's just say all science for now. Let's balance it out to be all scientists. So we have a 0.
0%.
Okay? Less than 1.
No humans.
No humans.
Are we?
Right, so less than 1. Okay, so Eric, can you adjust? No, the pink one.
Are we doing Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander?
Yep, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander.
Right,
also, Eric is doing this on a separate slideshow. Actually, can you go the other way? So when you do this, if you do this with your students, we recommend starting at 12 o'clock and working backwards up towards 12 o'clock.
Are we going to our 1%?
Yep, that's like your 1%. Okay.
All right.
1 out of 100%. Yeah, that's probably more accurate. Okay, and so how many, oh, somebody said 5%. Okay. How many do we think are American Indian or Alaska Native? We started off with 1%. How many do you think map into all of the sciences? Let's say, right? If we, so we got 3%, okay.
3%.
Less than 1, 6%. Also 0 with rounding, 1%. Okay, so if we got 6, 3, and then a bunch of 1s, let's put it at like, let's put it at 1. I guess, right? People saying 1 around. Okay.
How's that?
Then we have perfect, multiracial, like me. I'm Black skin, by the way.
40%.
40,
Nope.
40%. Yeah.
Nope.
I mean, we are the scientists. We're the ones here, right? We represent, man. What are you talking about?
100%.
Okay. Somebody says 10%.
10%.
Okay.
All right.
8%. All right. So wait, you got to move it up though.
Oh, yep. It's like a
Right. Okay. 12%, 8, 5. Okay. So let's say an average of that is about, let's say 8 is actually a good average for that.
8,
Because
okay.
you got 5, 1, 12. Okay. So that's about good. Okay. Also, each of these bars is 5%, by the way. Okay. Next we have Black. How many Black scientists do you think there are? We have 12% Black people in this country in 2014. How many Black scientists are there? 2 to 3%. 12, 1, 2, 5. Wow. Okay. So these are very low numbers. So let's say it's like a 4 or something, because this is very low. Everyone is less than 5. Right. Okay. Except somebody said 10, I think. But yeah, I'd say the average is pretty low. Okay. So then let's say, how many Latino scientists do you know? Not do you know? How many do you think there are? Okay.
That's a different question.
There are 3. No, so 3%, 5%. Ooh, somebody says 45%. Okay, so it's about 5%, looks like. Okay, so let's say 5%. Okay. Eric is an amazing Vanna White, don't you think?
Well, I also feel like this is like a sadder version of The Price is Right now.
Absolutely. Bye, Melody. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Melody.
Okay, so now we have, what's next? Asian. What percentage do you think scientists are who are Asian? We're gonna say 45. Wow, okay. 35 to 40, 40, 15, okay. 15, 20, okay, so let's
This is a lot higher.
say, yeah, this is a bit higher. This is surprising considering that there's only 5% demographic. Y'all are crazy. I'm just kidding. Okay, let's say 20. It looks like the average that I'm seeing is around 20.
Okay.
Okay, and then we've got white folks. What percentage do you think white folks are? Well, I mean, it makes up the rest, right? So we got a 50, we got 80, 55. So that's interesting that people are saying 50 when this pie chart is clearly like it's more than 50, right? So I find that interesting, first of all. Now, another thing to notice about this activity is that it is interactive. So you could do this with your students, right? You can create this pie chart and you could do one of two things. One, you can make one for each of your students. You can make one of these slides for each of your students and have your students all interacting at the same time. You could put them into breakout rooms. And you could label them so that they could interact with them. And super pro teacher hack is at the bottom of this Google slideshow, you have the layout mode. And if you go to layout mode, you can see all the slides at once. And so you can see all of your students interacting with the slide at the same time, and you can help them out if you need to. You can hop in like, oh, breakout room number 7 is having some trouble. Let me hop in there and help them understand what they're doing, right? And so this is actually a really useful activity, or really useful tool for facilitating this activity. Another thing you could do is you could, Eric knows this super cool hack, which probably all of you know it, where you can change the URL right after it says edit. If you delete that and write copy, and that's the link that you give your students, when they open that, it will automatically ask them to make a copy to put into their own Google Drive. So they're accessing it totally separately, not interacting with you at all, which is also another pro tip. Thank you, Eric. That was lovely.
Nicely done.
Right?
Nicely done.
So now, okay, we have our data. Okay, we saw would this work with Pear Deck too? I'm not that familiar with Pear Deck. Eric would know more than I would.
With
it's the same, isn't it? Like you can use Pear Deck in Google Slides. So.
Up to this point, it'd be better to have students. Yeah, it depends on what version of Pear Deck you have. Because there's premium and regular, but there is a way to do it, but it wouldn't be manipulating like how we just did it. But there is a way to do it in Pear Deck. It'd be a little different.
Yeah. Okay, so we saw what our graph looked like. Okay. So this is what we started with. We ended up with something that wasn't too far different from the population, except we said that the basically all the minorities are few and far between, with Asians being around 20%. Okay, I know, Mary, me too. Eric taught me this like 2 days ago. Okay, so Mary says that her mind is blown with the copy in the URL. It's nuts. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next slide. And this is actual data. Okay, so once again, you have the population up in the right. Okay, this is the same population data we started off with. If we were slick, we could have copied our graph and then popped it in here for reference, but that's fine. This is the actual data from physics, chemistry, engineering, and biology. So you can see how this maps into each of these fields, okay? So I have some questions now for you in the chat. Again, what do you notice from this and what do you wonder, right? No, actually go back, right? So what do you notice and what do you wonder from this slide right here, this actual data that we are now looking at? You wonder about the zeros, okay? That's a good point, right? Because I think the zeros just mean less than 1, and they should have written less than 1, but this is the way that like Microsoft Excel graphs, right? But I think you can change that.
Yeah, you can probably add more decimal places.
Yeah. Why are there so many Asian folks in physics, but less in others?
It's a great question.
That is a good question, right? Might this validate some of the images we saw of what a scientist look like, right? Yeah. So yes, so 2 things come up for me here that I see right here, right? Where's the bias begin? So why are there so many Asian folks in science, given that we start off with 5% and now we have like 32% as physicists, right? And you have fewer Latino scientists in physics than in other disciplines, right? That's another thing to notice. But there's this idea of model minorities that comes up for people, right? Who is a model minority? And what does it even mean to be a model minority? And this is present here, right? This stereotype feeds into who we are actually elevating and supporting to be scientists, right? So we did these drawings but did you see any Asian scientists when we were drawing them? I didn't notice any of them that were particularly, like, it didn't say anything. They all just looked like white dudes with crazy hair. But according to this data, they're kind of all white dudes with crazy hair, right? So like, what's going on with that, right? We're saying that there's a problem with this draw a scientist activity because, oh, well, all the kids are just drawing white dudes. And it's like, oh, but look, they actually are mostly white dudes. So how do we fix that? How do we change that, right? Like it's not enough to just sit here and puzzle about it. Now, this activity right here actually came from a curriculum which Aaron mentioned in the beginning, which is called the Underrepresentation Curriculum, okay? Now, the Underrepresentation Curriculum was designed by physics instructors. These are high school physics teachers who said, you know what? I have a problem with the fact that my students don't see themselves in science, and that my students don't see, like, I can't find representation for my students. It's not just men on the pie charts. Carol, you're absolutely correct. On the pie charts, it's both men and women. And there is other data that we do have. You can do this activity for gender as well. So in the underrepresentation curriculum, they decided, like, you know what? I want to figure out ways to have conversations in my classroom and teach my students with real scientific data about representation. Who is in science, why that is, and what can we do to change it? So this curriculum was started in physics. There's a link on this slide so you can access it yourself and you can register for it. It's a completely free curriculum. And it's tried and true, and it's been used for several years now by many teachers, and they've even brought in other scientists now. So it's not just for physics, right? So they've been extending it down into middle school, and they have shared it now, or sorry, brought in people so that It's in chemistry, it's in engineering, it's in biology. They're trying to make it more widely used. And the whole premise of it is really like, okay, step one, what is the problem? The problem is that there is underrepresentation. We just did this activity, this pie chart activity, which is also linked in the one-page document for you all. That activity kind of identifies what the problem is. It is underrepresentation. How do we solve that problem? That's another thing, right? Actually solving the problem is going to take a lot of work, and it can be daunting. It feels like you can't do it. But what this curriculum does is it kind of eases you into working with your students through critical thinking and through data analysis and data capture, to the point where they feel like they can actually take action and make change, so that in the future, this problem doesn't exist, right? So you have an 8th grader today who says, oh my gosh, there's no Black physicists. And then all of a sudden they go through this curriculum, they have these really important conversations with their classmates and with their instructor, and they feel more like, oh, I have found the Black physicist now. And the white students are saying, oh my gosh, there's a problem. There aren't any Black physicists. I'm going to help support my fellow students who are Black, who believe in physics. I'm not going to push them out of it. I think that they're just as good as I am, because we're all good, right? I'm a real life physicist and I'm Black and Mexican, but I made up as like 0% on that graph, which is sad, right? And I don't want that to be the case. And so the question now is, okay, how do we actually take action, right? How do we actually analyze data? What is the data? How do we find it? And this is what we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, and how do we actually move towards action? I think one of the things that tends to come up a lot is people are this kind of great awakening that's happening in the US. And for us to go back, Desiree, we really thought it was important to also model not doing business as usual after what just happened on Wednesday. And that's one of the things for us in the classroom is when we do things like that, and for some of us who don't feel comfortable in the space, it feels safe to do that. But remember, like, being safe is not necessarily what makes you uncomfortable. And we just saw people commit and participate in an insurrection that, if it happened with people who look like Desiree and I, would have a completely different outcome. And that's not something that can't be discussed. Those are things that need to be addressed in every classroom, because these types of things affect all students. And remember the blind spot activity. Just because it may not affect you personally doesn't mean it wouldn't affect other people and other students. Desiree and I went to school, grew up with passions for science with people who didn't look like us. And that's a very different experience. And Desiree, I'll share something that you said to me the other day that's always been resonating with me, is that I don't have the option to turn on the television and change the channel from people who don't look like me. In other words, television shows aren't filled with people who look like me. I don't have that ability. And when you do have that ability, that's a kind of a blind spot for a lot of people, where you can just kind of, oh, I'm not going to watch, UPN or BET or those shows or one of the Spanish networks. I can just watch shows of people who look like me. And that's a thing that's not everyone has the ability to be able to do. And so the Draw a Scientist activity that we did, I want to talk about Draw a Scientist 2.0, because just like how our students typically draw scientists that look like white men, there's a reason for that. It's because society typically pushes that for our students. These are the scientists that I kind of grew up with, and there's nothing wrong with being a white male scientist. The problem is when that's the only story that's being told, and that's what becomes the issue. And so in pop culture and in movies that represent a scientist, typically this is what our kids see. It's no wonder why it's what they draw. And we don't need more movies about how people of color are doing great in sports. That's awesome. We need more movies like Concussion and Hidden Figures and things like that. We need more cartoons and representing what's really out there, because what happens when you go to school or you grow up and you don't see people that look like you doing things like science? Well, the odds are you're going to see yourself as being less likely of being able to participate in those fields or being a pathway for you as well. So the Draw a Scientist 2.0 activity, after you've already had your students collect data and you've talked about these things and you've done the pie chart and it's kind of, oh man, how do we turn that around? And so what an amazing group of teachers have done is they've created this diverse scientist database. And we've shared this with you on the one sheet that we have and that Aaron's been dropping in the chat. What this is a spreadsheet of over 200 scientists. Now, this is kind of a wiki that's been developed collaboratively by a lot of educators in the Bay Area and I think across the country, of scientists that represent various ethnic groups across the gender spectrum, countries of origin. There's over 200 scientists on here where your students can look through and identify someone that they may want to highlight. So now that we've talked about the problem and that the pie chart is way out of whack compared to what's our city looks like or our country looks like, now we start having students create a classroom that looks like them, so that the same story of this is not being told, but instead their story is being told. So what we'll do is you take this spreadsheet, have your students identify a scientist, and then have them start creating. So getting our students from being content consumers to content creators. So now they're creating posters of their scientists and doing research on scientists that they choose. That way their classroom starts looking like them and they start seeing themselves up on the wall with people that they resonate with. So this is an example of one from a Google slide that I did as an activity with students where they chose a scientist and they put some basic information. It also teaches some digital skills. Your students are learning how to be able to do some basic graphics design. You can use a more sophisticated website like Canva. And if you don't know, Canva Premium is free for educators and for students. So I've included a link in the resources. If you sign up with an education account, you get access to all the bells and whistles, and so do your students. And this is a way to make data beautiful and to be able to design. And that's a really important skill, especially now, is not just collecting data, but also being able to present it in a way that's visually appealing. And so this is one, Lonnie Johnson, who invented the Super Soaker and was a NASA engineer, phenomenal guy, and has a battery tech company that he's developed. This was a poster that was developed, and they have some amazing templates. And if you want to go analog, old school, back when we were in the classroom, which feels like forever ago, this is my classroom and my students. These are some posters that they created. And again, we do this in the first week of school. But when they look around, my classroom is teaching without me. And what it's saying is, this classroom represents you. And there are people who are like you and represent the cultures you come from, the backgrounds, your gender identity. There are people who can pave the way for you. And one of the great things about it, if you want to take it to the next level, is we don't got to do a bunch of dead people. What if you took people who are living and made them living, breathing role models? And since we have social media, have your students do this activity and tweet them and Instagram them and say, hey, Dr. Whitmore, you're up on our classroom wall as the physicist that represents somebody who my students can aspire to be like, or someone that can inspire my students. And then if you can go to the next level, now that we're all on Zoom, you can do some scientists, Zoom scientists, things like that. And now your students are able to make some real connections with people that they may be able to connect with later on in life. And so this is that 2.0 activity. And so asking that question, go ahead.
If a student tweeted me and was like, you're on our wall, I would lose my mind. I would just start crying and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a real life scientist.
It would be just the honor. I mean, teachers, think about when your students come back. If you've been teaching long enough, you've had students who've gone on to, to go into some STEM pathway, or they tell you that message of, hey, when you said this to me, or you did this, or when I was in your class, it kind of lit a fire for me to go on this direction. That feeling that you feel. And what are we doing? We're creating community. We're not just creating community in our classroom, but we're also connecting our students to a broader science community. Instead of being these intangible, far away people, they're actually accessible. And as Dr. Whitmore just said, if a student reached out to her and said, hey, look, I have you, you're up in my classroom, my inspiration, this is where I want to be like you one day. Just the feeling that you would feel, and the feeling that that scientist would feel, or that mathematician or engineer would feel, would be amazing. And so asking that question as we design our curriculum and design our lessons, how are the identities and experiences of your students represented in your pedagogy and in your curriculum? And we view our curriculum through that lens primarily, we're ensuring that we're becoming more inclusive by incorporating more stories and experiences of our students. So, Dr. Whitmore, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I wanted to add that in the chat, folks are talking about like using also other tools like Skype a Scientist to access it, or like if they know of diverse scientists that they would like to add to the database. And I think, yes, on both of those things, right? If you want to add scientists to the Skype a Scientist or to the diverse scientist database, you can access this link, and then when you can send a message to, like request access for the document. Those are the people who actually control it. And so you can ask them, those are our teachers in the Teacher Institute, teacher leaders across the state of California. And you can ask them like, hey, I have some new folks for you. Like, can I add some people to this document? This document, however, is a bit vetted. So research has been done into these scientists. You can see yellow actually means like it's checked, and orange means they're still working on it. So all of the yellow folks are like, all of this data is absolutely 100% accurate. And so if you do submit something to them, what you're going to do is like, they have to then go through and vet all of the information. So the more you can give them, the better. I would also add that over the last year, earlier in 2020, there was an incident in a park, and a gentleman had the police called on him, and he was just a birder, a black birder in the park, and a white woman called the police on him because she wanted him to get shot, right? She knew what would happen. In response to that, black birders across the country decided like, wait a minute, like people aren't allowed to just go birding. And so they started this whole movement on Twitter, on social media, that was like Black in Birding Week, right? And what they did is like all of these Black scientists who are birders just started using this hashtag Black in Birding. And they started posting pictures of the birds they were seeing. They started posting pictures of themselves doing their jobs. And that took off. From there, you had Black in Data Science Week. You had Black in Chemistry Week. You had Black in Physics Week. You had Black in Psychom Week. You had Black in Neuroscience Week and Black in Engineering Week. And so this whole last year, there has been this whole campaign on Twitter to really show people the face behind the science. And so you have Skype a Scientist, you have this diverse database, but you can also just go to Twitter and type in hashtag Black in Physics. And then what's going to happen there, you're going to find a whole bunch of Black physicists. You can have Black and STEM, or Latinx in STEM, Native American in STEM. Like if you're looking for a specific group of people in science, you can use these hashtags on Twitter, and you can find real life scientists who are doing science today. And many of them are science communicators, and they're sharing their science in very accessible ways that your students can access. And so that's a really nice way for you to access them as well. That's all I wanted to add to that. And it is in the one-pager resource page that Eric is now showing you, including the Draw Scientist activity, the underrepresentation activity, as well as actually a tool that we are out of time to talk about today, but the Arduino Science Journal, which is a way that you can have your students actually participate in gathering data and being real life scientists.
Yeah, using their phone, it's an amazing tool. So if you're here live or watching, go to that link, especially download the app. It's free. It turns your phone into a data collection device. Your students can do citizen science at home, in their backyard. And one thing I wanted to add is, as teachers, especially as STEM teachers, we're teaching our students how to think about the world, but teaching them how to, or we're telling them what to think, but teaching them how to think is critical. Some of the most tragic and devastating events were not decisions that were made based on claim, evidence, reasoning, and analysis. Human beings, as objective as we want to think we are, we're emotionally driven creatures. And things that happened on Wednesday started with an idea. It started with the way people think. And we, by nature and by profession, our jobs are political because we're shaping the way kids think. And so as science teachers, as math teachers, as tech teachers, engineers, we have a duty and a responsibility to own that role. And now that that blind spot's been removed, whatever change that we make, we should be able to quantify. It's not just enough to feel it. What's going to be done? What are we going to do? How are we going to implement it? How are we going to be that voice? And if you've been on the fence and you're in this video and you're saying, hey, I'm just scared, that's okay. That's a starting place. We want you in the game. And so join these communities that Desiree mentioned on social media, on Facebook. If you have another person on your campus that you can do this work alongside, it's messy. Even as Desiree and I have been doing this work, and educators, a lot of you've been doing this work before it became trendy, like before it became the thing. It's not like all of a sudden systemic racism has been something that just happened in June with George Floyd. Many of us have been doing this work for years or our entire career. And we're happy that some of you are just now getting into the game. We want you to be here. And it's okay. It's going to get uncomfortable. You're going to make mistakes, but we do want you to be advocating and taking action. My contact information, the Exploratorium's resources are amazing. Teacher Institute TI is my favorite teacher organization, PD development. Desiree is my favorite physicist. I'm super excited she was here. And I just want to thank San Jose State, Dr. Latimer, Aaron, Brian, and everyone else for putting this together. It's been an honor. And educators, thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you for being here. There is a session after this, and a Q&A. So, we also have feedback. Please give us feedback. So, okay, the Teacher Institute, we do all of this work throughout the entire year. If you've never heard of the Teacher Institute, that's a problem if you're a science teacher in middle school or high school, because our resources, as Eric mentioned, are very valuable to the teachers who we do work with. And we'd like to work with the new teachers, right? And so please give us feedback on what kind of things you would look for in like a Decolonize Science workshop, or even, have you even heard of the Teacher Institute? Do you know what the Exploratorium is? These are questions that we would like to know the answer to, because we can make this better, and we can bring you to San Francisco for 3 weeks to come and learn about science with us. It's actually a very great experience, and it's super fun. You can come and play physics with me at the Exploratorium, which is one of my favorite things to do.
Lasers.
I am the laser chick, so we can play with lasers if you come visit me. Awesome. So we have a lot of thank yous. You are welcome. Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome.
Yes, we have, get all this info into my tool belt. I love it. Yeah, thank you for joining us all. And yeah, please do join us if you have questions for us. We are going to be in a more interactive Zoom in a moment. So feel free to pop on over there so that we can actually dive more deeply into some of these concepts.
Thanks so much, Desiree and Eric, for sharing your time and your knowledge and your insights with us. I know everyone who's been attending today is really appreciative. They're dropping all the thank yous in the chat. Yeah, as they mentioned, we're going to have our discussion room right after this. So it'll just take a second for us to close out this webinar and open up the other Zoom, but I just added the link in the chat one more time if you need that. It's also in the confirmation email I sent you all yesterday, and we'll see you there in a second. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.